This week we're taking a little break from Prismatic and going back to Strand Warlock for the new exotic Mataidoxia. When this exotic was announced, everyone said that it was going to be completely useless, and I can say that we were wrong. With this build we're looking at today, we'll have an absurd amount of suspending capabilities, very good melee regeneration, and we can even get a very steady supply of woven mail to give us that extra damage reduction. But before we get into the video, please consider subscribing as it helps me out a ton and helps the channel out a ton. Like the video so the algorithm can push this to people who may be interested in this video, and comment what you think about this exotic down below, and let's get into this. Like I just mentioned, the exotic for today's build is going to be the new Warlock exotic chest armor Mataidoxia, and it comes with the trait Stylostasis. Targets damaged by arcane needle emit a suspending detonation when defeated, and landing multiple arcane needles on the same target immediately triggers a larger, more powerful detonation. Defeating suspended targets grants melee energy, and our arcane needles are strong against barrier champions. This exotic has a lot, so let's break it down. When we hit a target with an arcane needle, they're going to get this little mark on them that tells you that when you defeat them, they will cause that suspending detonation. This detonation is actually fairly small and will only suspend other targets directly near the original target, so you may only get 1 or 2 targets. Landing all 3 arcane needles will immediately cause a suspending detonation, and it is much bigger. Using it on like unstoppable champions, for example, I could suspend anything that was near it within a good chunk of just distance, and it was actually really nice. When we defeat targets that are suspended, we will get melee energy back, which is honestly really nice with this exotic, as of course it pairs back into the arcane needle. The amount we get depends on the types of targets we defeat. For bigger things like champions, we're going to get more energy. I don't know the exact value for this, unfortunately, but with the amount of suspending that we have in this build, we're gonna keep it up very consistently. And finally, our melee is able to pierce barrier champion's shield. This is very nice, as when testing this build, I would have to reload my pulse rifle, and then they would put up their shields, and luckily, with 1 arcane needle, you can pop their barricades, their shields, which is honestly super nice. And in my head, I was like, if this takes more than 1 arcane needle to pop their barrier, then this exotic is honestly really bad. But 1 arcane needle pops the anti-barrier shields, which makes it really nice. For weapons, we have some really good options like Monte Carlo for great melee regeneration and uptime, and Wishkeeper for adding more suspension into this build. But because they don't have artifact options this episode, I went with the sidearm Final Warding. This sidearm is amazing, probably my favorite exotic to run with Strand builds. When we hold the trigger, it will charge up and mark targets. When we hip fire, the bullets will track those targets and do increased body shot damage. When we aim, the bullets will move faster and do increased crit damage to those targets, and if we land a fully charged burst, it will unravel that target. It also got a catalyst, hits against marked targets deal more damage, and have a chance to refund ammo into the magazine. It is honestly perfect, and again, my favorite exotic to run with any and all Strand builds, and this is no exception. For my energy, I ran an arc pulse rifle. This was for 2 reasons. One being that it is anti-barrier, and yes, I know that's what our melees are for, but sometimes the needle doesn't track right or hits the floor, so it is nice to have this just in case. The second reason is Volt Shot for overload champions. You kill just a little minor guy, and then you reload, you get Volt Shot, you jolt the overload champion, it stuns, and then you can burst it down with your heavy. And for heavy, I chose the new LMG Pro Memoria with reconstruction and target launch because it's just very good, but you can use whatever you like. For our class setup, you can use Prismatic if you want because we do have access to Arcane Needle, but I feel like we get more out of this from the Strand subclass itself, so that's what I'm going to be using for this. For aspects, we're going to first take Mind Spun Evocation. Your Grapple, Shackle, and Threatening Grenade have enhanced functionality. We're using Shackle Grenades, so hold to consume your Shackle Grenade and activate Weaver's Trance. Final blows while Weaver's Trance is active create a suspending detonation. This aspect really helps with keeping everything suspended, and that in turn will basically give us infinite melee energy when we defeat those targets, which is very nice for this build because we play into our melee a lot when it comes to this build because of our exotic chest armor. Our next aspect is going to be the Wanderer. Tangles you throw attach to targets and detonate into a suspending burst. Destroying a tangle creates a suspending burst after a short delay, and threadling final blows create a tangle. This also helps a ton with suspending everything, as that is the whole goal of this build. Plus we can involve tangles, which we can make constantly, and we can play into some of our fragments and artifact mods. And if we want to, we can also add threadlings with the use of hatchlings on our weapons. For fragments, we're going to start with Thread of Generation. Dealing damage generates grenade energy with a -10 to our discipline. We want our grenades up quite a bit for Mindspun evocation, or just to be able to throw our shackle grenades normally, and this definitely helps keeping that suspension up for all the targets that we want to keep it up, because Mindspun evocation is a very good source of suspending targets. We're then going to take Thread of Fury. Damaging targets with a tangle grants melee energy with a -10 to strength. We're making tons of tangles that will already suspend targets when they damage those targets, and now we can double dip into their usefulness by damaging targets and getting melee energy back, which again is then going to suspend them, and then we will defeat those suspended targets for even more melee energy. Thread of Wisdom. Defeating suspended targets creates an orb of power. We have so many ways to suspend targets at this point, so we may as well be able to help the rest of our build by making orbs, and we're going to make a lot of orbs. Unfortunately, this does have a crazy 10-second cooldown, which I think should be like 8 seconds, but apparently the balance of the game, they don't want to make too many orbs, whatever. This is still a very good fragment to have for this build. And finally, we have Thread of Warding. Picking up an orb of power grants Woven Mail with a -10 to our resilience. All the orbs we're going to make is now going to give us Woven Mail, which gives us, I believe, like 45% damage reduction inside of PvE, and I'm not going to complain about any kind of additional damage reduction no matter what I'm running, especially in that higher end content. Thread of Warding is always a very good fragment to run no matter what build you're running when it comes to Strand. For armor mods, starting with our helmet, we have Harmonic Siphon, so our Strand weapons can make us orbs. Dynamo, so when we use our class ability, we get super energy. Hands-on doesn't work as well, as our melee is more for utility. And then Heavy Ammo Finder, so we can have constant heavy ammo for whatever heavy weapon you're using. For arms, I did take Heavy Handed just in case we did defeat a target, we would get an orb, but you do not need to run this. And then 2 melee kickstarts to consume our armor charge stacks and get melee energy back. For our chest, we just have our resist mods. Swap them out as you need. Solar, Void, Arc, Strand, Stasis, whichever ones you want, put on. Whichever ones you need for whatever activity you're running, use. For legs, we're taking Elemental Charge, so our tangles will contribute to our armor charge stacks. Then we have Recuperation to give us health back on orb pickup, and Invigoration for melee energy on orb pickup. For our bond, we have Reaper for orb creation, Powerful Attraction to pull orbs to us, and Outreach to help top off our melee energy if need be. And I will admit, Outreach did help me out quite a bit in some situations. For artifact mods, there are 3 of them that we really need to take for this build. Authorized mods, Elemental Charge to make Elemental Charge cost 1 energy, which is super nice to use. Elemental Siphon to help make more tangles with weapon defeats from kinetic weapons or weapons matching our super. And finally, Threaded Blast, so when we destroy a tangle with a Strand weapon, it causes a bigger blast and does more damage. This in turn, by the way, will also get more benefits from the Wanderer, as we're going to suspend more targets, and Thread of Fury, as it's going to damage more targets with that tangle. For stats, you can make fun of me because my Warlock is lacking when it comes to armor stats, but you're looking for max resilience and strength, for damage resistance and melee uptime, and then I'd say like 70-ish, very mid-tier recovery and discipline for health regens, rifts, and grenade energy. And then I really didn't care about mobility or intellect, even though my stats say otherwise. This is just the armor I have. Overall, I do think this exotic is very good compared to what we saw when it was announced. However, I do think there are still some shortcomings of it. First of all, if you're running in a full team, you might not get the maximum amount out of this when it comes to defeating suspended targets, or even being able to throw your Arcane Needle to pop a shield. And Arcane Needle's tracking also sometimes just goes straight to the floor for some reason, so always keep that in mind when you are running this exotic. But again, I still think it is much better than when it was announced, because when it was announced, it literally looked like you throw all 3 Arcane Needles to suspend 1 target. Now that we have it, obviously we know that there is much more to that. It can suspend targets by defeating something with an arcane needle, landing all 3, it can pop barrier shields, and we get melee energy back from suspending targets, which I think helps this exotic more than anything else. If there was no way for you to regain any kind of melee energy with this, I honestly think that this would have been, again, probably the worst exotic. But luckily, it's not. It's still very, very good, and I actually really prefer to run this in like solo lost sectors, so try this build out in those first, see how you like it, and then you can move on to other activities. But with that, that is the end of our video, so thank you for watching. Of course, subscribe if you like the video, helps me out, helps the channel out, like the video to push this into the algorithm, and of course, comment down below what you think about this chess piece, and I'll see you guys in the next video.